Hi, friends. Ray here, and so glad you joined us for this podcast. We're journeying our way through our message series called Origins, and it's a walk through Genesis 1 to 12. And we're going to bounce off today on Genesis 4. And because there's only limited time in our messages to kind of answer every question, and sometimes just the desire to want to apply what's in the text or trajectories that flow from the text. But before I introduce my guest today, I want to remind you or introduce you to Bruce Springsteen's song titled Adam Raised Cain, because that's what Genesis 4 is about. And the lyrics go like this. In the Bible, Cain slew Abel, and east of Eden, mama, he was cast. You're born into this life, paying for the sins of somebody's past. That he worked his whole life for nothing but the pain. Now he walks his empty rooms looking for someone to blame. You inherit the sins, you inherit the pain. Adam raised a Cain. And he's telling the story of Genesis 4 of Cain and Abel and Adam and Cain, and using that to explain his own story and dysfunctional relationship with his dad. So, Dr. Amy Kellogg, that's why you're here today, for lots of reasons. Now, you're not the kind of doctor, if I had a heart attack, you'd do me any good, right?
No,
You're the other kind of doctor.
Absolutely not. Yes.
Okay. And you specialize, you're one of our counselors at church. You head Compass, which we're so thankful for. What a great ministry. Now, let's explore a couple of the themes that spring out from Genesis 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. Firstly, dysfunctional families. Mm-hmm. Just walk us through the place of origin. We've been looking at origins, the place of the origin of families and how they impact us. You want to walk us through the impact of that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's interesting to think about, Genesis gives kind of the overall origin story, but each of us has kind of a personal origin story as well. And so much of that has to do with our families and how we grew up, our upbringing, our parents, our siblings, and that kind of thing. And a lot of times we think that, as adults, we sit here thinking we're just interacting day to day, we're doing our thing.
The past is the past.
And the past is the past. It doesn't have anything to do. Oh, if that happened, I've forgotten about that. That's not affecting me now. What we actually know is it's affecting us massively at a subconscious level. All of those things that happened early in our earliest years have impacted so deeply the way that we see the world. And so oftentimes, especially in counseling, it's a lot of it is just helping people understand those kind of dynamics, how these stories of our own origins have kind of impacted us and the messages that they've sent us. So it's actually a very important piece of our,
Now,
our
I
growth.
find whenever I overreact,
Mm-hmm.
that's usually a little window into something in the past. I always think we're either trying to prove our mother or father wrong,
Yeah.
or still trying to get their approval, even though they've died even, but they're still in our heads playing whatever part of the story that they're playing, for good or for ill.
That's right. Yeah, and that's a good way to think of it. A lot of times we know sort of in our gut that there's just something underneath this. It's not just this thing that's happening in the present. There's something that really hits us hard. Maybe we're an insecurity, or maybe a fear, or something that hurts that has gone on that oftentimes we haven't processed. I know for me, in my 30s, probably, I sort of had a moment of kind of going longer than a moment, but, like a period of time where after I had my own children, I began to really reflect on my own story and certain factors in my own family of upbringing. And sometimes we don't want to do that because we're like, I love my parents, they did the best, or I love my, siblings.
Or it's too painful.
Or it's too painful. I don't want to think about that. And we sort of avoid it. But by doing that,
because it sometimes feels disrespectful.
Yes, yeah.
But the reality is, it's not dishonoring them. It's just coming to terms with what is.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And I think something that I've come to recognize personally, both personally and professionally, right, is that just because like people, and especially the people that are closest to us, often even our families, we've experienced hurt. We've experienced harm from them sometimes. Some people have deeply dysfunctional kind of dynamics in their family, and they have deep hurt. And so sometimes, we wrestle with wanting to almost name that, or not. We don't want to name that, but it's actually healing comes through actually naming the hurt. And I can still love my parents. I can still come to a place of forgiveness with a sibling or a person who has hurt me, and yet still name the hurt that has actually happened and name
It
that.
seems to me you can't forgive them properly unless you've named it, and even
That's
if they've
true.
passed away. But naming actually in the Bible is actually important, isn't it? It's part of almost reclaiming our control back in a world that we feel out of control. So
Yeah.
if I'm able to, in fact, I was talking to someone just this morning, and they were just the act of them naming their pain in the presence of the person who hurt them.
Absolutely.
Wow, already they're starting to be empowered. It wasn't vengeful. It was just, I need to tell you this story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Dan Allender who does a lot of things around around trauma and around our origin stories and things. He was talking about how 50% of the process of some of that healing is just naming, is just becoming aware or bringing to the surface some of those deeper hurts that we have experienced in our past. And like you said, it's important for us even to move forward. We have to be able to say, hey, here's some things that went on. And that's going back to your comment, like that's why when this situation happens, it triggers something for me. So it actually becomes really an important piece in us healing and growing and becoming, sort of a newer, version of ourselves that works through that pain.
Now you used the word be curious
Mm-hmm.
When we were talking earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What did you mean by that?
So I think oftentimes curiosity is one of the best things that, the best ways we can look at a lot of things in counseling and in reflective, even just reflecting on our stories. It's being able to, almost have that kind of like that posture of like, I'm not going to judge this thing. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, figuring out all the bad things about it, but I am going to notice and I'm going to be curious and I'm going to pay attention to those things. And when it comes to say like, I know when Brad and I, my husband, we went to couples counseling for a season. And one of the most profound things we did what they call a genogram, which is where you just basically, you map out your family of origin, and they sort of ask you.
What do you mean by that? Like your parents, your brothers and sisters?
Yeah, and then grandparents and whatever
Why
generation.
Is that helpful?
It goes back to this word curious, right? Because as the counselor was like asking, hey, what do you, tell me a few words about this person or that person. And oftentimes we sort of know, we know them and but we don't take the time to really be curious and think. And when we put it all kind of on one A3, paper, and we really stepped back and then thought, okay, let's look at the things that we're dealing with in our lives. How are some of these patterns and these both good and bad? I mean, some of them were very positive, and other things, like, maybe the way that families through generations dealt with emotion or communication.
So, for example, it's crying is bad or it's weak.
Yeah, or we don't talk about our emotions. We just get on
yeah.
and we put our heads down and we do things. And it was very insightful to us. And we were able to do that in a posture of curiosity that then let us look at that and say, these are the things that we want to carry on in our family legacy with our own daughters. And these are the things that we actually wanted to stop here. Right? And it became a really powerful tool.
I always love
us.
the fact that we become the generation that can turn the tap, close the tap on some of those sins that get passed on. Right. Not so much generational curses, but sinful patterns that are passed on, unhealthy ways of relating. And it's a great honor because you then get to influence the generations from you.
But if you don't stop to take a look at some of that, okay, and going back to some people have extremely painful stories. And that can be, don't get me wrong, that can actually be very difficult to go back and look at. So we're talking about trauma.
And probably good to do with a professional.
Absolutely. Yeah. So sometimes in our curiosity, it's more than curiosity. It's actually, I need to go into this with help and be able to find some grounding and some ability to work through that pain. And there are times where we can go back to people who maybe there's abuse in the past, or maybe there's other types of hurts or dysfunction, but sometimes we can go back and we can address that. But oftentimes it may not even be safe to do so, emotionally safe even, or physically. But there's something about the process of actually actually engaging that story and engaging maybe the hurt or the harm that has been done to us, that in itself becomes healing and helps us to make choices about our future and how we want to do those things.
It's amazing how it can release you from some of the addictions we have, because you go to those places to mask the pain, and
that's right.
You go to that place that's to numb you from that wound that you keep avoiding.
That's right.
In my previous church, there was a counselor. She said, if you don't deal with this stuff, those emotions go down into the basement, start pumping weights on you, and they become mean and nasty on you and to others as well.
Another phrase that is really helpful for me is, when we bury the past, we bury it alive.
Right, yeah.
It's going to come back up. And it does come back up over and over.
Yeah.
And most of the time, if we really reflect on the patterns in our lives that just we get stuck in, there's oftentimes a link to something. Maybe just think about like something somebody said to you early on that just, you took that in, you didn't really understand everything, but you go, never again am I going to let this person hurt me, right? And I'm going to create a world where, I can protect myself.
You ask me
from that.
Even hypothetically, I go to a train station. I can tell you, take you to the spot where my best friend said something to me, and it was the end of our friendship.
That's right.
And I reckon it took me more than 6 years to get over it. And when I met him in another context, I still couldn't talk to him about it.
Yeah.
Thinking, wow, that was powerful. One line, one sentence. Can I just ask, one of those traumatic things is favoritism in families. I mean, you got the Cain Abel story, right? And that was God favoring Abel because he gave his best, and Cain who gave his leftovers, and then Cain resenting Abel and letting that bitterness develop into anger and tragically murder. And so we've got the first murder in the family, and we're only 4 chapters into the Bible. And so that's a different kind of showing favor. But favoritism, it can be very dysfunctional. Can you want to talk about that at all, that you've come across in your counseling?
Yeah, this is one of those dynamics, right? There's a lot of things. There can be sibling rivalry as well. There can be favoritism or parents, sometimes maybe not meaning to, but sort of there's a feeling of treating kids in the family differently.
Can I just say, just on that, sorry for interrupting, you naturally connect with some of your kids more than others. You love them equally. And I know my wife connects naturally with my son, and I with my daughters. We just similar. Now I love my son dearly. I'm so proud of him. But there's that kind of natural connection that can easily, if it's not balanced properly, can cause unintended pain, can't it?
That's right. Yeah, and many times it's not intentional. Sometimes it could be, there can be really dysfunctional things, but oftentimes it's not intentional. I know my eldest brother, probably still to this day would say I'm the favorite, and I'm the youngest, I'm the baby, I'm the only girl.
Yes,
right?
I was cursed with being the favorite as well.
Yeah, and I mean, of course,
well,
why not, right? but it can be. I mean, probably to him that was a really difficult thing, and I think it goes back again, even as a parent. I'm wanting to be, it goes back to that awareness and that openness to be able to sort of talk through some of those things and even sometimes ask the hard questions of our kids. I've asked my daughter that, like, hey, do you feel like, the other one gets the attention more, or there's, and I think that staying present and really being able to talk through some of those things helps kind of navigate some of those, maybe sort of those natural connections that start to feel like favoritism. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you do where it's not imagined? Sometimes it's imagined favoritism. Sometimes it's insecurities that make you think a certain member of the family is favored over you. But sometimes it's as clear as the nose on your face, and you're basically, oh, she's my favorite or he's my favorite, and it's sort of public without any qualification. How do you journey someone living with the fact that your father, mother, or both of them explicitly say to everyone how proud they are of your sibling, and at the very least say nothing about you? You've been silent. That is such a deep wound. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard, right? And this sort of goes back to the fact that we can't always change those circumstances. So let's take a sort of a more intentional kind of situation like that, or and we can't always, we can't always change the parents. So if somebody's come to me and it's their felt experience, a lot of times the best we can do is kind of work with their own ability to say, of course, like how my family, how my parents think of me is, we all kind of in a sense want approval from our families, like whether
it's natural.
We might pretend we don't, but really we do,
and
we kind of grow up in that sense. But there is I guess there's a point of being able to say, okay, this is the acceptance of this is kind of what's going on in my family, and I can't necessarily change that, but I can look at, okay, my heavenly Father, right? How does He see me, and what is the what is the way that I can look at this and my identity and my sort of that sense of that need for approval, even just like exploring where does that come from, and where do I need to find that, ultimately where do I need to find that approval or that sense of acceptance
now,
from?
I'm thinking of a song.
I
won't sing it. It's not Bruce Springsteen. I am who you say I am.
Yeah.
That just for me always captures, I'm defined by what my Father in heaven says of me.
That's right.
Not what my earthly father says of me. Yeah.
And I mean, I would love to be able to help people heal their earthly relationships. And when possible, absolutely being able to, sometimes parents just might not have any idea that that's how they're coming off. And if there's that opportunity, hey, let's facilitate a conversation, or here's how you could go and approach and say, this hurts me, right? So there's all of those things, but we can never guarantee that the person in the other chair is going to respond to that in the way that we do.
And sometimes they've passed away and you can't do it.
That's right.
And sometimes, I remember I did it. I felt like it was the making of me as a man when I had that conversation with my dad.
I remember this.
It was a defining moment, but I didn't get there automatically. It was a bit of counseling that led up to that point. And only when I understood the fatherhood of God could I actually talk to my father in a non-demanding way. And he didn't quite get it. It was like I was speaking another language, but I needed to name it. And I felt like I was set free after that. I said what I needed to say because I didn't need him to change as I entered into the direct conversation. I just want to move us on because of time. This is excellent stuff, Amy. Have you ever thought of being a counselor? Because you're really good at it. Now, Lamech comes after, he's in the line of Cain, and it's not a particularly good line. And he boasts if Cain was avenged 7 times, then he's avenged 70 times 7 for his ungodly behavior. And then Jesus, much later, picks up those words when Peter says, how many times do I have to forgive? And he thinks, 7 times. He thought, because I think the Pharisees only required people to be forgiven 3 times. And he must have thought Jesus was going to be happy with 7 times. And then he says, no, 70 times 7. In other words, your posture is one where you forgive. Anyone who's been forgiven forgives. But that can get misunderstood. Can we just briefly touch on what are some of the pitfalls that Christians fall in when they think about forgiveness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the things that I commonly come across, right, and I'm sure that you do as well, is there's the obvious one is that people really struggle to actually forgive. They don't, there's just just an anger and a frustration and and it becomes very toxic. It becomes very almost poisonous to them by holding on to this hurt. So, we're talking about naming hurts. Well, sometimes we can almost over-identify with the hurt, right? We can take that on and almost not know how to live without the hurt.
Now, why is that? Is that because if I forgive you, you'll get away with it? Is that, that justice isn't being done and I demand justice?
If I forgive you, then it's almost like saying what you did was okay.
Right.
And we can feel that way, right? And we can feel like if I've suffered, at the hands of someone, I don't want them to, I want them to suffer too, right? There's a sense of if you've hurt me, I don't want you to be happy, or I don't want you to.
The irony is you're usually the only one who's suffering.
That's right. So it becomes almost like a poison that you end up drinking yourself, right? Yeah. And so people can get really stuck in this. And I've seen it a number of times where it's almost like they stop knowing how to be them without that pain.
It so defines them.
Yeah, it becomes
that's a good way of saying it.
But the other pitfall is right. And Christians are notoriously bad for this, to be honest, because we feel like, oh, we're supposed to, forgive. We're supposed to, that's what the Bible says. Let's do it. That they actually kind of spiritually bypass the whole process, right? And it's kind of like ends up being, it's sort of like, I'm going to avoid actually going through the pain of that or thinking through that or even saying you've hurt me or naming it, right? I'm just going to slap a Bible verse on there and be like, hey, this is just, I just need to move on. But just like we said, if we bury that, right, it really, we're not really resolving it and it'll surface in other ways. And so I think oftentimes as Christians, even as people helping, right? So even helping a friend who's going through this or whatever, in a way that like we mean well by it, but we can sometimes just say, oh, but you should just, just forgive. And we end up short-circuiting that whole process of pain that I think that really, I think that God does want to heal, but oftentimes he wants to do a deeper work in the midst of that healing. And if we short-circuit that with a Bible verse and a quick, like, you need to forgive, people actually miss out on that, on the depth of that process.
I remember hearing on the radio a man straight after an attack on a church where this man's wife got killed. And he was talking about forgiving the very terrorist who killed his wife. But subsequently I heard he was not in a good place for a long time. And I think he spoke it was a beautiful thing to hear, but it was actually too fast. And it was heroic, but almost harmful for him. The other thing I remember is Gladys Staines. You know Gladys Staines? Her husband and two sons were set alight in a camp, in a car, in a Christian camp in Orissa in India, and by religious extremists, and they were killed. And, her posture was one of forgiveness and deep forgiveness. And I interviewed her at my previous church and I said, how did you manage to forgive? She said, I think what helped was I learned to forgive the little things in life. So when the big one came, I felt like I was more prepared. And I thought that was a wise thinking, that if it's part of you, that you've traveled down the journey of processing, forgiving the small things, you're much more in a better position to be able to forgive the big things without the masking and the covering up.
Yeah. And likewise, I think when we even reflect on our own humanity, on our own need for forgiveness, right, from both other humans and also from God, right? We can put that into perspective. That doesn't mean it's easy, but there is a sense of that active, just like you're saying, that active small ways of just practicing forgiveness in the everyday, and what's interesting is actually we do, in order to forgive, and we sort of said this earlier, we have to acknowledge the hurt. And I know for me, for a long time, that was really difficult. If somebody said, oh, I'm sorry, I'd be like, oh, no, don't worry about it. It was almost like I couldn't acknowledge it. And I sort of shifted more toward like being able to say, I forgive you. And it might have just been a small thing where really I wasn't that bothered by it. But it was the practice of saying, yeah, that did hurt a little, and I'm going to name that hurt, but I'm also going to extend forgiveness. And in those little exchanges, just much like you're saying, we're practicing that, so that hopefully maybe as we experience deeper hurt, we put some of that into some practice.
And I've got a feeling that what it does is you get to taste that God's way is the best way. Yeah. You get the freedom, because you're actually blessed while experiencing the suffering yourself and not retaliating. Because I always think forgiveness is overcoming the art of revenge. You're wearing, a bit like Christ did at the cross, really. And the other thing is, I find I'm not having to wonder whether I'm going to forgive, because Jesus says, he makes it part of the discipleship deal, right? Like, I have forgiven you, I expect you now to forgive others, right? So it's not a question of if now. My energy needs to be focused on, it's on a journey, it's a process, it's not going to be overnight. I have to go through the non-pretending, but I'm not wasting my time thinking like forgiveness is not an option.
And a good illustration I've heard once of this is like if you think about being on the beach, and as you enter, it's like as you enter the ocean, as you put your feet in, you're in the ocean. But it's not the same as, you're still on a journey when you actually keep walking out and that's oftentimes we can begin the process of forgiveness, but but not really be, just have our toes in it, right? But we're turning our will to say, God, help me to be forgiving. I am in a process of forgiving. But this sort of light switch mentality of like, I've got to just, I've forgiven them or I've not forgiven them. Actually, that illustration of just kind of like, man, as I go,
Slowly
and
wading into the water
as I
of
wade
grace.
in and as I understand more deeply and as I work through the pain and as I actually acknowledge the hurts, I'm going deeper and deeper into that forgiveness. So eventually, actually I can say, wow, okay, I am, I am in a place of deep forgiveness. That may be a journey that lasts a lifetime, right? And forgiveness doesn't mean that that what someone did is
there
okay.
aren't consequences or necessarily even reconciliation, because it takes two, doesn't it?
It doesn't. It doesn't mean that, and it doesn't mean it's going to work out with that person. It doesn't mean, because we can't control what their response is, but we can make those active choices. But I think that key is by forgiving. Somehow we associate forgiving means saying it's okay that you hurt me, that the hurt wasn't that bad. And actually it's not that. It's saying in spite of, even though, you did hurt me, and I am choosing to forgive this and let it go.
Got to get on that peace train. As I say, you could be in the last carriage in the last seat, but it's good to get on it because it's God's way is the best way.
Are you going to sing that song too, or no?
Peace Train, Cat Stevens.
We need a
he lives in
soundtrack.
Dubai. Obviously not by the name Cat Stevens anymore, but that's for another day.
We need
I'm
a
ready to
soundtrack
sing it, but I'm
with
going to restrain. Amy, thank you so much. That was so helpful. I wanted to touch on other issues, but our time has run out. But all that means is we get to do this again on another occasion. See, that's me cornering you. See, I'll get you back, coming back. Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you for coming alongside and keeping the conversation going, because that's what we want. We want the Word of God to fill all of our life in natural ways, because it is a living and active Word. And encouraging one another, forgiving one another, but encouraging one another, teaching one another, learning from each other, not letting the Word of God stay for the preacher on Sunday. It's too good. Let's enjoy it all week long. And I hope you can tune into our messages if you haven't heard them already on YouTube or on one of the social media outlets. But look forward to seeing you again next time we explore Genesis 6-9. Whoa, the flood, where every inclination of the heart of man was only evil all the time. Whoa, looking forward to that podcast. See you later.